There can be no peace plan for Ukraine unless Europe gives its approval on issues concerning European interests and European sovereignty. Such a bold statement was made today by German Chancellor Friedrich Merz in response to speculation from Americans and Russians. And against this backdrop, more and more diplomats and politicians in Europe fear that Trump may actually reduce military aid to Kyiv if the peace agreement once again reaches a dead end. Earlier, there were already insider reports that Trump might become disillusioned with the failure of his own efforts to resolve the war unleashed by Russia and take this step. And today in Europe, it was also stated that the vast and exceptional capabilities of the United States in military intelligence allow the White House to dictate terms to Ukraine and Europe, who are highly dependent on this data. That's why European NATO countries are urgently trying to become more independent in this matter and to find an alternative so that Ukraine is not left without support. And now the Kremlin is already shouting that they will not accept a peace plan that includes amendments reflecting the position written by Europe. And in fact, the Kremlin has stated that they will only accept the plan that was originally presented in the media. However, representatives of the Ukrainian delegation insist that this version of the plan no longer exists. Meanwhile, today the Europeans held a separate informal summit in a closed format where they urgently discussed what to do next. I'm Pechiy, let's discuss this together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave any comment under this episode. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel Pechiy News, the link to it is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as soon as it comes in. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation or a paid sponsorship subscription using the links and details in the description of this video. So, the Financial Times writes today that there are concerns in Europe that United States President Donald Trump might stop supporting Ukraine, being disappointed by the failure of his own efforts to resolve the war. The White House has already increased pressure on Ukraine and its allies to make them reach an agreement with Moscow. This has caused concern in European capitals and in Washington that Trump is agreeing to Putin's demands. On Sunday, Trump criticized European and Ukrainian leaders on social media for not making progress in ending the war. And since the 28-point United States plan was presented to President Zelensky last week, European allies of Kyiv have called for additional work on the proposal. And now one European official has expressed concern that Trump might end support for Ukraine out of frustration, leaving Zelensky and his country in a dangerous position. This is a scenario we are obviously preparing for, he said. At the same time, European diplomats expect further meetings between France, Germany and the United Kingdom over the next week. And among other possible participants in these meetings are the leaders of Poland, Finland and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. And here, I will quote an important statement by Friedrich Merz, Chancellor of Germany. There can be no peace plan for Ukraine if we do not give our approval on issues concerning European interests and European sovereignty. And Europeans are indeed now doing their best to find an alternative that would defend not only Ukrainian interests, but also European interests. And there is already a report that the United States plan to end the war between Russia and Ukraine was significantly revised during the negotiations in Geneva. It was reduced from 28 to 19 points. Which specific provisions were removed is not specified. However, this happened after Kyiv and its European allies pointed out the unacceptability of a number of demands in the document. Thus, Ukraine reminded about its red lines regarding limiting the size of its army and territorial concessions, including giving up Donbas. Europe supported Ukraine and pointed out its exclusive right to make decisions regarding frozen Russian assets and the lifting of sanctions imposed by Brussels. But that's not all. Last year, questions about the past that were asked last year existed. Questions that were asked last year, in the past year. Last year. Questions that were asked in the past were asked, which were in the past. Questions that were asked last year were asked last year. Questions that were asked last year. Questions that were asked in the past. This closed summit is chaired by European Council President Antonio Costa, with European Commission President von der Leyen and leaders from Poland, Spain, Czechia, Portugal, Germany, Croatia, Slovakia, the Netherlands, Italy and Ireland also attending. The High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, along with leaders from Austria, Belgium, Bulgaria, Cyprus, Denmark, Estonia, Greece, Finland, France, Hungary, Lithuania, Latvia, Luxembourg, Malta, Romania, Slovenia, and Sweden, are also attending the summit remotely. So basically all of Europe is at this closed summit right now. The main issue on the agenda is the European Union's position on the peace plan for Ukraine and planning further joint actions of the European Union. Notably, they postponed the European Union summit with the African Union, originally set for today in Angola, to accommodate this summit. But the Europeans say, African Union, please excuse us, we have more serious issues here, so we're heading to our closed summit. And it was during this meeting that Zelensky called Antonio Koshka to tell the Europeans all the details of the negotiations in Geneva. And I think, in this situation, it would have been hard to even imagine all this before. What do I mean? Just imagine it. NATO allies are gathering at informal summits somewhere in Africa to decide how to respond to the somewhat treacherous position of another ally in the alliance, namely the United States of America. Well, I don't know. Previously, it was completely unthinkable for different countries within the same NATO alliance to gather informally somewhere to discuss what we should do. Because one of us is behaving inadequately and is clearly playing into the opponent's position. And interestingly, right now in Europe, they're urgently looking for ways not to be left without intelligence data if the war in Ukraine continues. In the European Union, they're worried Trump might end all assistance. It's important to remember that Trump has already stopped sharing intelligence with Ukraine once, in order to push it toward peace on terms favorable to Russia. And now the United States has threatened to do the same again if Kyiv doesn't agree to the latest peace plan prepared by Steve Witkoff and Kirill Dmitriev. And it seems that in Geneva the tension has subsided, and the White House has already announced that Trump has withdrawn his deadline for Ukraine. In Europe, they began considering ways to reduce reliance on United States intelligence. And now the leaders of the European Union are discussing this issue at a closed summit. What should be done if Trump actually stops all aid to Ukraine? After all, without United States intelligence support, there will be problems, for example, in the use of long-range precision weapons needed to strike targets on Russian territory. Then striking won't be possible. And that's why right now in Europe they're trying very quickly to find an alternative. And by the way, there is an alternative. Europeans just need to put in a little effort in this regard. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Bye everyone.